Have you ever sat on a night train, looked through the window, and seen the sky flickering past like a dream? Perhaps at some moment you've asked yourself, what lies beyond those misty mountains? It could be a small town still asleep in the fog, a winding river flowing around the meadows, or simply the faint lights glowing from a distant porch. That uncertainty is what makes the journey extraordinary. As if the train is not only carrying us through the landscape, but also bearing fragments of our soul. That night train departed from a small station lying quietly in the valley. The station was tiny, its dim yellow lights falling on the old brick floor, evoking the feeling of stepping into a long-forgotten book. The ticket inspector walked back and forth, his pace unhurried, unlike those at city stations. Only the whistle of the train resounded, long and far away like a distant call, stirring the heart. I tightened my scarf, stepped into the carriage with a sense of both familiarity and novelty. The seats were upholstered in dark green velvet. The lights on the ceiling not too bright, just enough to see clearly, yet soft enough to keep the eyes. From tiring, chose a seat by the window, leaned back, and exhaled gently, as if leaving behind a long, noisy day. Through the glass, at first the view was dotted with city lights, but just a few minutes later, as the train moved farther, darkness and mountains began to dominate the scene. There is something strange about night trains that pass through the mountains. People easily leave behind their daily worries. The sound of the steel wheels grinding on the tracks was rhythmic like a heartbeat, the swaying of the train like a lullaby. Outside, trees rushed backward, creating blurry, dreamy streaks. Occasionally, a solitary lit house appeared, then disappeared. Within seconds, leaving behind a feeling both fragile and warm. I sat there, sipping tea from the flask I had brought, the warmth spreading through my body. It felt as though everything had slowed down. The busy days out there seemed no longer relevant. In that moment I asked myself, perhaps each of us needs, at least once, to put ourselves on a train without a destination, to let it carry us through misty mountains, simply to hear the whispers of our own soul. The speaker in the carriage softly announced the next stop, yet none of the passengers moved. A few had dozed off, their heads leaning on the seats. An old man sat further away, slowly turning the pages of a worn book, his eyes intent as if conversing with an old friend. A young couple whispered to each other, faint smiles appearing in the dim light, all blended together, peaceful and serene. The train gradually entered higher mountains. Fog began to thicken outside the window, blurring the scenery, yet that very haziness broadened the imagination. I felt as if I were no longer on a train, but lost in a dream, where every sound slowed down, where nothing had to be chased after. Only the presence of myself amid the vast nature. I set the teacup down on the small table beside the seat, pulled the thin blanket over my shoulders. My eyes half closed, but my mind remained awake, listening to every sound. At times, I thought I heard the stream flowing somewhere out there, mixed with the rustling of wind through forest leaves. The train continued quietly forward, piercing through the night as if it had no destination, only the journey itself. In that moment, I realized something. Perhaps what brings peace to people is not the place they are heading to, but the letting go that allows them to enjoy the road itself. And this night trained through the mountains. With its rhythmic clatter and the hazy scenery outside, was the very ticket that carried me toward the stillness I had long been searching for. The train kept rolling steadily, carrying along a rhythm like an ancient song, slow yet never stopping. Outside the window, the dark mountains became clearer under the faint moonlight. The silvery glow drifted across the slopes, reflecting on the small streams winding through the forest, making the scenery both ethereal and gentle. My eyes followed each passing scene, feeling as if I had wandered into a separate world, where time no longer flowed in its usual way. Inside the carriage, the air remained quiet. A few passengers had sunk deep into sleep, their breath steady, their faces relaxed and unburdened. Someone leaned their head on a loved one's shoulder, as if finding warmth in the long night. Another person pulled a blanket across their chest, still clutching a notebook, as though they had left a thought unfinished. Each one had a different posture, yet all were enveloped by the gentle silence of the night train. The wind whistled softly through the cracks, carrying the chill of the mountains and forests. I pulled the blanket closer, but instead of feeling lonely, my heart was warmed by an indescribable sense of peace. Perhaps it was because in that moment I realized I was only a small part of the vast nature around me. The cold no longer seemed frightening, but rather became a sign that I was truly present, truly sensing the world around me. Suddenly the train crossed a bridge stretching over a valley. The sound of the wheels changed, echoing and reverberating from the depths below. I looked down through the glass and saw the river reflecting the moonlight, shimmering like thousands of broken mirrors scattered across the water. That sight made my heart falter, as if I had just encountered something too beautiful to hold on to for long. In just a moment, the train had passed. The light vanished, leaving behind the lingering feeling of a fleeting dream. Sitting quietly, I suddenly remembered the old days. When I was a child, I once sat on a train with my parents, also traveling through the mountains like this. Back then, I only felt tired from the long ride, not understanding why my parents kept smiling as they gazed at the mountains outside. Now, sitting alone on this night train, I finally understood. Sometimes, a journey is not about arriving somewhere, but about watching what passes by, about listening to how our hearts quietly change. The train went deeper into the mountains. The fog grew so thick that only vague outlines of trees remained outside. The moonlight gradually disappeared, giving way to an almost absolute darkness. Yet instead of a heavy gloom, that darkness brought a sense of shelter, as if the outside world had closed itself off, so that inside the carriage everyone could rest in peace, undisturbed by any noise. I quietly placed my hand on the cold glass, feeling as though I were touching the surface of a still lake. The chill spread through my skin, making me shiver, but it reminded me that I was still here on this journey. At times we need a little cold to cherish warmth, a little darkness to see the gentle light when it returns. Another train whistle sounded, long and deep, pulling me back to reality. I inhaled slowly, then closed my eyes. That sound, together with the rocking rhythm of the carriage, was no different from a lullaby. In my mind appeared the hazy peaks, the quiet rivers, then all slowly dissolved into vast emptiness. I no longer felt the need to think about anything. I just sat there, letting the train carry me through the endless night. And so, amidst the steady sounds of the wheels and the gentle breathing of the passengers around me, I realized I was gradually falling into a half-dream, half-awake state, where my mind still drifted, but my body had already begun to sink into sleep. The train continued silently forward, and I, a small passenger, was letting my soul be carried away, far, far away. The sound of the iron wheels still echoed steadily, like an endless rhythm on an ancient piece of music. Each time the train tilted slightly around a curve, my body swayed along, yet it was not uncomfortable. On the contrary, the feeling was like being lulled carrying me into a state between wakefulness and dream. Outside the window, the night grew denser. From time to time, the light of a small lamp hidden in the mountains appeared, then quickly disappeared like a falling star. I remembered the days that had passed, when life outside was full of haste. How many times had I felt like a train without a stop, rushing endlessly without pausing to look at the scenery along the way. Unfinished plans, missed appointments, words that were never spoken. All of them at times became burdens on my mind. But now, in the vast darkness, they suddenly felt strangely light, as if, by simply sitting still, everything could dissolve on its own, leaving space for slow breaths, for peace to quietly slip into the smallest corners of my soul. The train rushed through another long tunnel. Darkness enveloped everything until I could see nothing but the reflection of my own face in the glass. For a moment, it felt as if I were looking into my own inner self, one that had so often gone unheard. The echo in the tunnel rumbled on, drawn out like the resonance of past thoughts. Then light returned as the train emerged, leaving behind the sense of having just passed through a chapter of life. Dark but necessary in the distance, the mountains opened up, revealing a vast valley. The moon peeked out from behind the clouds, casting silver light across the ground as if it were sprinkled with glitter. The sight made me smile faintly. Perhaps after all, life is like this train ride, after tunnels of darkness. There will always be a moment when the light returns, illuminating the path ahead. In the carriage, a child stirred in sleep, clutching a small teddy bear tightly. The mother gently pulled the blanket over, soothing her child with slow, tender gestures. Watching that scene softened my heart. In the middle of a long journey, such a simple gesture was enough to warm the entire space. Peace sometimes does not lie in grand things, but in the simplest, most genuine moments. I leaned back into the seat, slowly closed my eyes, and let my mind drift toward distant memories. I recalled the laughter of friends during carefree days of youth, the aroma of the family kitchen on a rainy afternoon, the gaze of loved ones who once saw me off at some station. Those images appeared like old film reels, not too vivid but filled with emotion. Each memory, whether joyful or sorrowful, now seems gentle, like small waves softly lapping at the shore of remembrance. The wind outside blended with the wheels, creating a soothing melody. I listened, then suddenly felt my mind calming. The restlessness and worries of so long dissolved. What remained was a gentle acceptance. Everything in life has its own rhythm, and if we know how to let go, we will find harmony within it. The train crossed another bridge. This time, there was no bright moonlight, only thick fog covering the scene, making it mysterious. Yet instead of fear, I felt as if I had entered a fairy tale realm, as if behind the veil of mist there could be an enchanted forest, hiding wonders waiting to be discovered. That feeling made me smile in silence, realizing that imagination itself can sometimes be the way for the soul to rest. The night grew deeper, the carriage became ever more quiet. Only the sound of the wheels and my heartbeat remained in sync. I shifted slightly, pulled the blanket higher, letting its warmth embrace my body. Sleep began to seep in, soft and gentle. And in that very moment I understood, sometimes we do not need to search far for peace. For it has always been within the very journey we are on. We only need to pause and feel it. The night had grown late. The train continued to move forward, steady like an endless breath of the earth and sky. Everything around sank into silence, leaving only the soft clash of metal, blended with the rush of wind slipping through the window gaps. In that space, time seemed to stand still. I felt as though I were no longer sitting on a train, but floating across a vast ocean, where the waves lapped gently and the sky stretched endlessly above. The faint moonlight slipped through the window, casting a soft glow across the carriage. Each glimmer seemed like fragile threads, quietly draped over the seats, over shoulders, over faces already sunk in sleep. Some leaned their heads, their breathing steady. Some closed their eyes halfway, as if already dreaming of a faraway land. Together, they formed a tranquil painting, beautiful enough to stir the heart. I wondered. Perhaps long journeys always carry a special power, one that makes it easier for people to let go. When we sit in the middle of the night on a train crossing mountains and forests, the noise of daily life no longer reaches us. The burdens we carry seem smaller, while the soul feels as open as the vast sky outside. It is within this silence that we can truly hear our own heartbeat, hear the whispers of our deepest wishes. The train passed through a low hill region, where rows of bare trees stood still in the mist. Each trunk cast its shadow in the moonlight, like silent sentinels guarding the forest. Occasionally a breeze stirred, shaking the dry branches and creating a faint rustling, like nature's secret conversation. I listened, feeling as if I were in the midst of a wondrous symphony, where every note was woven from wind, from mist, from moonlight, and even from the darkness itself. Inside the carriage, the ticket inspector walked slowly down the rows of seats. The small beam of light from his flashlight swept across, illuminating each place. His steps were gentle, as though he did not wish to wake the dreams of the passengers. When he came close, I nodded lightly and he returned the gesture, with a smile before quietly moving on. That brief moment, though ordinary, evoked in me a strange sense of safety. As if, no matter where we were, even in the deepest night, there would always be people silently ensuring our journey remained peaceful. I shifted slightly, gazing out the window. The night fog had thickened, laying a mysterious veil over everything. Mountains, valleys, winding paths, all slowly disappeared behind it. I could no longer clearly see the scenery, but instead, imagination began to paint new images. I pictured a small village nestled at the foot of a mountain, with warm golden lights shining through its windows. I imagined the distant bark of a dog, the sound of footsteps returning home after a long day. And in those visions, my heart felt a rare peace, as though I too were returning to some familiar home. The whistle of the train sounded, not sharp but long and deep, like a voice calling out across the valley. Its sound lingered in the night, then slowly dissolved into the vast emptiness. I gently closed my eyes, letting that whistle guide me, as if it were a sign that the journey still continued. And all I had to do was sit calmly, letting everything unfold in its own rhythm. Perhaps sleep on a train always holds something unique. It is not the sleep of a familiar bed, but the sleep lulled by constant motion, by steady beats, by the breath of nature through each passing scene. It is the sleep of a traveler, the sleep of a soul temporarily freed from every tie, merging into a greater flow. In the dim light, I noticed tiny specks of dust floating, spinning gently with the faint breeze. They danced within the narrow beam of light, like little stars that had wandered into the carriage. I followed their movements, feeling my heart soften, like a child watching the night sky. As my eyes grew heavy, I smiled faintly. I knew the train would carry me on, through the night, through the mountains, toward a place of greater peace. The iron wheels still rolled steadily on the tracks, yet the rhythm seemed slower, as if the train itself knew the journey was nearing its end. Outside the window, the night was no longer as dense as before. Faint streaks of light began to appear on the horizon. It was not the moon, but the herald of a coming day. I gently opened my eyes, sensing the space around me slowly changing. Towering mountains had now faded into shadow, while the distant valleys began to brighten slightly. The sky remained a deep shade of blue, but along its edge, a thin streak of orange slipped in. The sight made me feel as if I had just passed through a long dream and was now awakening in another world, a world of new beginnings. Inside the carriage, few passengers began to stir. The soft creak of seats, the quiet murmur of whispers rose, but all remained gentle, not breaking the fragile silence still lingering. The mother with her child had also awoken, carefully tucking the blanket over her little one, while gazing out the window. Her eyes glimmered with a tender light, as if offering a greeting to the dawn blooming outside. I sat still, completely relaxed, letting my mind drift with the rhythm of the train. I thought about the journey I had just taken through the night. There had been no great events, no dramatic stories, yet countless small moments etched themselves deeply into my heart. A gust of wind, a glimpse of the moon, a smile, a passing memory. All blended into a gentle symphony, lulling me into a peace rarely found amidst the busyness of life. The train gradually approached a small station. From afar, I could see golden lights glowing faintly in the morning mist, like stars that had fallen to the earth. The sight reminded me of the image I had once imagined in a hazy dream before. A warm village nestled at the foot of the mountains. And now it was before my eyes, no longer just a vision. I smiled, feeling as though I had been gifted something unexpected by the journey. The train whistle sounded again, long and warm, like a farewell to the mountains behind and a greeting. To the dawn ahead, I clearly felt that I was about to leave the world of night, stepping into a new day, and in that moment I felt no regret. For even though the journey would end, its echoes would remain forever in my soul, like the light of a star that continues to shine even after it has left the sky. As the train slowed, I took a deep breath. The early morning air drifted in through the cracks, cool yet pure. It carried the scent of damp grass, fresh earth, and the faint fragrance of a world awakening. All of it filled me with hope, as though I too had been reborn after a long night. Passengers began to rise, preparing for the stop. I remained seated for a moment longer, taking in the view outside one last time. I knew that when I stepped out of the carriage, the busy life would once again await me. But I also knew that I carried something precious, the peace that the night had given me. The train finally stopped. I stood, put on my coat, and stepped softly onto the platform. The sky was brighter now, the first rays of sunlight painting gold across rooftops and treetops. I turned back, looking at the train still draped in morning mist, like a dream slowly fading. And I silently gave thanks for having shared this long, contemplative night with it. Then I walked on, my heart as light as if it had never borne any burdens. For sometimes a journey does not merely take us to a place, but brings us back to ourselves. And in that moment I understood, no matter how many stations or how many journeys life may hold, we will always find the way home.